So let's talk a little about Ebola, because you
Yeah.
just mentioned it. Like, so what was your take on what happened? I mean, that was just kind of crazy.
It was really crazy. It was crazy. So when I was in med school, the disease that I was the most afraid of was Ebola and all of the kind of like those types of viruses, the Marburg virus, Ebola virus. Why? Because the mortality rate is really high. So in other words, once you get it, it's very likely that you will die from it, right? So I was afraid of it back then because I didn't really know a lot about it. So I, like everyone else, when Ebola, was kind of rising in numbers in West Africa, I was scared and I was like, this is so terrifying. And then I took the time, as a clinician, just to learn a little bit more about what we know so far about Ebola. Because any new disease, it takes the scientists a little while to understand things like how does it spread? Who does it spread to more? How does it kill you? We have to take a little bit of time to learn about it. So once Ebola was kind of more explored, I stopped being scared of it because the ways that you get it are pretty hard to get it. And we're very lucky because if you do get Ebola in this country, there's pretty good services to treat you, right? So I think that like all the combination of knowing more about it made me personally less scared. Although I can understand people's fear, I feel like we have been overreacting in general as a society.
So what did you learn more about it that calmed you?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is how do you get it, right? So for example, I like to use the flu as an example. If someone has the flu and they're in a room with you and they sneeze around you or they, somehow get their germs on you, even if they're kind of a little bit far away, but if they sneeze and the droplets can get on you and yes, you can get the flu, right? So that's an airborne transmission. Things like the flu are not fun because, it's very easy to spread. However, things that are harder to spread, things that are spread by bodily contact, which is how Ebola is spread, means that you really have to be getting someone's like saliva or vomit or other bodily stuff on you to get the virus. And so that's one thing that people should know is that you have to have somehow gotten someone's bodily fluids on you. Sitting in the subway next to someone who has Ebola, you probably will not get Ebola. So that's one thing to like know and be very certain about. And then secondly, we know that once you do get Ebola, if you get to the hospital quickly, as we saw with the nurses who had it and the doctor who had it, if you get to the hospital quickly, they will help to treat you because the reason why you die from Ebola isn't just the Ebola. It's because you bleed a lot and there's no blood to give you, if you're in West Africa, for instance, there's no blood products to give you to, increase your blood count. You can't breathe on your own, but we can't intubate you in West Africa. And so all the things that we can do here, which we can't do over there, is why people over there are dying so much. But if you get Ebola in the US, chances are you'll be okay.
Now, what about the one patient that died, Mr. Duncan?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what was different between him and, for instance, the nurses that are okay?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people really wonder that. And some of the conspiracy theorists say things like, well, he was black and he's African. And
yeah, I've read that.
Yeah, And really the reason is because he went to the hospital twice. The first time he went, he wasn't as sick. Then he went again when he was very sick. And essentially what Ebola does is it targets all of your organ systems. So it targets your kidneys, your heart, and it tries to shut down those organ systems. If you can prevent it from getting kind of that out of hand, your organ systems are okay, right? Mm-hmm. He was very sick by the time he got there. So his kidneys shut down and they put him on dialysis, which is a way to kind of replace your kidneys while you're sick. But the problem was the rest of his organ systems were so affected that it was too late. Mm-hmm. Unlike the nurses, who they knew that the nurses had Ebola even before they started showing the signs of Ebola, like the abdominal upset, the nausea, mm-hmm. the vomiting. So those people had a much better chance because we were able to give them everything they needed, fluids, anything they needed before they got really sick. And I think that's the difference and that's the most important thing.
What do you think of the response that the government had to this Ebola, and how do you think that contributed to the public hysteria around this issue?
Yeah, so I think it's really hard because public health is meant to do two things, which is one is to learn as much as you can about a given condition, and the second is to make sure you protect the population, right? So based on what they knew at the time, they felt like they were pretty confident not putting people on strict quarantine or the other measures that ended up being called for. And part of doing good public health is to not cause panic. And if you start talking about things like quarantining people and just kind of shutting off the borders, you're going to create a certain level of panic, and that's also pretty irresponsible. So I think that on the one hand, with the information they had at that time, they did a pretty good job. I think we learned a little bit more. We didn't expect those two nurses to get sick off of Duncan. And once that happened, people lost faith in the public health system. But I don't think that there's any way to do this perfectly, and I think with what they knew, they did the best that they could.
It's like a first time,
Exactly,
so.
exactly.
And what about the media's take on this
Yeah.
outbreak?
I mean, I think that it's irresponsible to call it even an epidemic or an outbreak. We had a few cases. And I know that people will say, oh, but you're a doctor, and so like you're not, nervous because you know more. But really, if you look at the numbers, it would be nearly impossible for the average person to get Ebola. Like it just is very difficult for the average person to get Ebola in this country with the different measures we've done to protect people. And so I think the media having stories like, latest on the Ebola outbreak, and it just scared people. Yeah. And fear makes you not make such rational decisions. Right. Like, if you think about it, the best way to stop Ebola is to make sure we get as much resources, and resources include money, people, food, doctors, nurses, over to West Africa, where there is a true epidemic, where people are getting infected in the hundreds, people are dying in the thousands. So if Americans and places that don't have Ebola are serious about containing Ebola, we have to send everyone over there and fix it over there, right? Mm-hmm. However, when you're scared, which is kind of what the media did to people, you can't think straight. You can't think, oh, maybe we should make sure, that area is being protected. All you care about is you just want to sit in your house and not do anything. And,
right.
and that makes the problem worse. So I'm really glad that we didn't end up closing the borders to West Africa, and I'm really glad that we have continued to try to get people to, go over there and to help, because that's the only way to stop it.
What was your take on the nurse, Casey Hickox? What was your take on her?
So, I think that she was really bold. I think that she was absolutely correct. Like, trying to prevent people who don't even have symptoms from engaging with other people, this quarantine thing, I think is a terrible idea. And this is why. So, when you are a physician or a nurse, you have to take a lot of time out of your life if you want to go somewhere else and help. So if you want to go to West Africa and work with people who have Ebola, that's at least 2 or 3 weeks just to get there. Imagine if this person then has to come back and has to be in quarantine for another 21 days. That's unpaid vacation time. Mm-hmm. Some people might even lose their jobs. Mm-hmm. So what does that do? That prevents a whole lot of people who would have gone from going. Mm-hmm. So essentially you decrease the people who need to be on the ground helping to fight Ebola. You've made it so that they can't go. So I actually thought it was very irresponsible to suggest that when we don't have enough evidence, because it's really important to remember, if someone doesn't have a fever, they probably don't have Ebola. And so as far as they monitor themselves, which people do, because remember, if someone has Ebola, they need to know it just as bad as the rest of us need to know.
They don't want to have Ebola.
Exactly. They're the ones who are going to die.
Right.
So yes, they will monitor themselves and they will be careful. And once they do get sick, they'll go to the hospital. And no one will get infected before they get really sick. And so I think that it was very irresponsible to try to force healthcare workers coming back from these countries to have a mandatory quarantine. Completely disagree with it.
Because that's also what happened with Mr. Duncan, right? He felt sick, he immediately went to the hospital. Like that, you're right, nobody wants to die from Ebola.
No one wants to die. It's not a good death, and no one wants to die from Ebola. And so if you tell someone you might have Ebola, please check your temperature once a day, they'll check the temperature 4 times a day. They're terrified, like they want to make sure they're okay. And so I don't think people are lying or trying to be sneaky and trying to spread Ebola. I think people just want to live their lives and help, where they can.
And do you have anything else you want to say? Final words about Ebola or about that?
I just think it's really important because the epidemic is not over in West Africa. I think that the media response on it has died down a little bit, which is good because we don't need hysteria. But people shouldn't forget that Ebola is ruining societies in West Africa. And if you can't go there and work and whatever, you should really consider donating to organizations that are doing good work. And you can go to the CDC website and they have a list of organizations that are excellent that you can donate to who are doing work on the ground. And I think that it's something that we can all consider doing because, as I said, if we want to really get rid of the threat of Ebola, we need to take care of it in West Africa. So every little bit will help.
Yeah, because the Ferguson thing happened and then Ebola is just over.
It's something new for every news cycle, but Ebola is not over in West Africa.
Yeah, because according to the news, it's over, and it's just good to know that there are organizations you can donate to. And I think your point's absolutely correct. Like, we have to send people over there to help because it's going to decimate West Africa otherwise.
Absolutely, and also I think the connection that some people care about more is, if you think about it, societies like parts of the Middle East where there's a lot of civil war and whatnot, what comes out of those places are these terrorist cells, right? Mm-hmm. And so what people are projecting is that if we allow Ebola to completely ravish Sierra Leone and Liberia, and the societies crumble, because essentially if you kill off enough of your healthy adult population and you have, starvation, and you have, people are going to start to think, well, they're going to start to think radical thoughts. And so from this, we could be afraid that we would at least create the environment for fundamentals organizations to take over, and then we'll have yet another group to worry about, coming to get us. And so I feel like it's not just Ebola and just the loss of human life, but also our national security, not to overstate it, but I think that we tend to see years later how these things have an impact. And so, don't close our borders, don't quarantine people who are trying to go over there to help, and donate when you can and if you can to really try to stop Ebola in West Africa.